Hello, sir.
Shasidhar.
Hello, sir.
Hello, good evening.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, can you
Address ಮಾಡಿ ಒಂದು Shasidhar sir. Sir, good afternoon, Shasidhar sir. Am I audible to you?
Yeah, yeah, you are audible.
You can unmute and talk.
Yeah, I've unmuted it. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, you're also been made as the presenter so that you can share the slides.
Yeah, sure.
You
Thanks.
can try once, sir. Just present.
Right click ಮಾಡಿ change it.
Go start.
We'll start in 10 minutes and 5 minutes in there.
Sir, we'll start in another 5 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Those things. So what I have planned is I have created a simulated case study where you will get an hands-on experience how exactly the incident happens and how an incident responser can respond to that particular event. So we will start a brief introduction about incident response, then followed by we shall have a what do you call procedures, what exactly the organizations are following when it comes to incident response. Secondly, we will have a case scenario where I will be taking through the investigation part. So anyway, you will be with me to do the investigation. I will only guide you guys to do the things. Okay, so it will be more of the practical and less of theory. So let us begin. So when we look at the cyber attacks, when it comes to uh, COVID-19 themed attacks, because once these kind of what do you call attacks happens, they would come with a theme. So now the theme would be like COVID-19. So because the lots of phishing mails, spam we will receive in this COVID-19 theme, right? So only the statistics which I have showed here is on the COVID-19 theme. So let me show you the figures here. The total malicious detection, which is of COVID-19 themed cyber attacks, uh, that is okay, 97 lakh 18,774, and the total unique hashes would be 6,860. Okay, so total unique organization would be 9,468. So if you look at the figures, so it says that the criminals have utilized this theme and they have gained many things. So when it comes to a comparative analysis of the country wise, so the total detection, anyway, the US stands first, then India stands at 6th level, getting this type of infections detected. So when it comes to organizations, what are the sectors that it is targeting is, one is the telecom, outsourcing, and other agencies, government, retail, financial sectors, then process manufacturing company, then insurance, software companies. So these are the companies which are uh, have a large impact from these particular attacks. The threats, you can see the Trojan, ransomware attack, and worms, virus, and many other things have happened. So, for example, this was the malware which was sent to millions of people, where it's a banking Trojan, where it has a theme called COVID coronavirus disease COVID-19.vbs file. So many of the programmers may be knowing what is VBS files. So here, so these kind of what you call COVID-19 themed attacks are happening. One of those is the your sniff malware. What was the purpose of this is it is to capture the activities of the system, the first place. The second place, it used to get the keystrokes. Then it used to what do you call monitor the network traffic, then browser activities. So earlier there was a situation where the malware comes, infect the system, and it will do it work and it will go back. But now what is happening is the malware will sit for a long time in the system, monitoring, understanding how the things work, then it will start infecting. So that is why the malwares which nowadays we are looking at to are more dangerous than the old ones. So other examples of phishing mail, so just for an awareness for you all. So there are COVID themed attacks. One is coronavirus infected company staff. So if you say if the malware author sends these kind of what do you call text and all, what normally the employees will do is they will start responding to it. Maybe they will end up with installing something malicious. So again, another example, COVID-19, World Health Organization, CDC underscore doc.zip. So these are the files which as though it look like coming from WHO, but it's not. So another malicious software, that is Emotite. So it is also called as Fileless Malware. I will tell you about the Fileless Malware in upcoming slides. So these are the malwares which will be only infected to the RAM of your system. It will use the memory space in the RAM, execute, do its job, and it will suicide by itself. So leaving no traces for the um, or the examiner to analyze on the disk. Next, coming to the ransomware, we have this. As you all know, the ransomware, how exactly it works. Normally, once it is infected, encrypt all the user created files, and it will demand the ransom if you need that particular decryption key. So this basically works with public private keys, where it will be encrypted using public or private key, and it will be asking you the private key for the decryption. So coming to incident response. So incident response, it's a structured process where most of the organization follow. So basically it includes a preparation for the incident, then detection and analysis of a security incident, then containment, eradication and full recovery, and post incident analysis, and also key learnings, which is very important. I will be explaining it further. So incident response life cycle would look like this. Starting would be preparation stage, where the organization prepare before getting hit by any of the attacks. So that shows the preparedness of the organization and what are the measures that preventive measures that they have put in, and if in case they've hit by any ransomware or any type of data theft, so they should have some team or what you call uh, techniques to detect that kind of attacks. So that is first phase. Coming to the second phase, that is identification. So identification is the place where the exact investigation will be done. The first thing is you need to identify from where exactly the threat has entered, attack has happened, and from that where it has moved. Maybe it has infected to one of the employee system and it has traversed or moved laterally from one system to another system, and it has gone to a system where the credentials are dumped in. So it has extracted that and uses the same lateral movement to come and get out of the system. So this is the identification phase, where I will be explaining more on the investigation part, how to discover the malware in this particular. First of all, we need to identify the trigger from the security team. So based on that inputs, we need to figure out what is the IP or what is the port that is responsible for this activity. Then we need to connect that to the existing systems available with the employees or the clients, customers. Then we need to go to the scene. We need to do the live forensics, get the live information from the system, get the live RAM dump, analyze it, and confirm whether this is the process, this is the system which is responsible for this malicious activity or not. So that is very, very important to discover the malware and to confirm the malware and its activity. So that is the main job here to do. Next is the containment. So this is the starting phase of cleaning the what do you call system from all the malicious installed malicious softwares or malwares. So this is where we stop the further infection to the systems. Maybe, for example, the ransomware attack has happened. It has infected to 5 systems. You can contain that and you can stop the further move or further infection. So what are the steps that is taken at that particular point of time is very important. Next is the eradication phase, where you will be fully cleaning the system and it is free from all the threats or attacks. So that is what the eradication speaks about. Then coming to the recovery part, you are recovering all the uh, data, or you can say restoring the particular system for the normal operations. So in that phase, it is very difficult because every time it's not possible to go to the recovery stage so easily, because we need to have these process done so that we can easily recover the things. The last, but it's very important, that is lesson learned. Many organizations will ignore this, but this is important, because whatever we do in this process, from starting from the preparation to the recovery, we will learn many lessons there. So for example, we will come out, we will encounter many of the IOCs there, indicator of compromises. Okay, we will get some of the information. We will get to know what is the behavior of the malware. So those things are captured and documented for the and we can put it in the what you call threat intelligence, so that we can identify these kind of threats and predict what may happen tomorrow. So that particular intelligence can be dumped in the lessons learned part. So that will definitely give inputs to again prepare the organization for the next attack. Also, it will help in preventing also. It's not only one-sided. It will give the it will help organization to how to take the preventive measures to avoid such attacks. But what there are few what do you call mistakes that many of the organization does is, once they complete the identification stage, they will start going to the recovery stage because they want to run the normal operations as soon as possible. But if those things are happening, what happens is the similar attacks will repeat again and again, because you will not be immune for those attacks and you don't know how the attacks will happen. So that's why it's very important, we need to uh, use the identification phase effectively and the containment phase also, so that you can learn the lessons and put it for the next upcoming incident responses. Fine. So what is the difference that we are looking into nowadays? Why these fileless malwares are coming up, and how it is dangerous? Let us understand. So there are traditional malwares, you all know about that, and now the fileless malwares are coming up, which is creating a lot of challenges for the investigators to identify the malware on the hard disk, on also in the network also. It's very difficult, I will let you know. So this is a traditional malware infection where the incident response is required. First, this is the left side, you can see the entry, the point of entry, where you will see the malicious attachments. It may be from mal spam or phishing mail or malicious websites, exploits, USB storage device. You may get some USB on road and you just come and put it in your official laptop, or you will get in spam mail or phishing mail. You end up with downloading some of the malicious programs, or there may be some infection from the remote, and you have some vulnerabilities in the application, and some malware authors may exploit it, right? So these are the things which happens. The end of the day, it will be downloaded or written on the disk. So where we can do the disk forensics to identify that and confirm that infection, right? So maybe the disk forensics is nothing but we are understanding what has happened, maybe some anomalies or some activities going on the disk. Maybe some downloads you have downloaded to the disk and you have connected the pen drive to the system. So that is recorded in the system registry, and during the disk forensics we can identify that. So those things can be done in using the digital forensics techniques. So coming to the antivirus, it can only detect the virus which are already present in their database, or they have the signature for that particular thing, then they can identify it. If not, it's very difficult to identify those kind of malwares. So coming to the fileless malware. So this is memory resident malware, which mean to say that this malware directly downloads to the memory space of the RAM, execute in the memory, do some connections, extract some what you call download other binaries, and infect the system. So this will, or this is one process. The other process is it will only inject a code directly to the memory space. It will not inject the process itself, it will only inject a code. It's called code injection. So to the memory, and it will start running from that. Okay, it may inject the code to the memory space of the legitimate process, and it may change the behavior of the legitimate process. You see that it's in Chrome or Firefox or any other well-known uh, executables, but it may be behaving in a different way. So next is, it leaves very few signs of infection, making it very difficult for traditional tools to identify, including traditional disk imaging. Next, it will minimizes the forensic artifact creation on a compromised host disk, as I told you earlier. So it will not leave any traces in the disk, it will only be in the memory. But the difficult part or challenge while dealing with this memory space of the RAM is it's a volatile memory where the data will be disappeared when it is restarted or shut down. So that is very important. We need to get or take the information before shutting down or rebooting the system. So one example or the pictorial representation of how this fileless malware look like is, one is the entry point would be the same, but it may be a remote code execution where the script is run, which is directly downloaded to the memory, and it start running from that. User malicious website is another entry where it loads the scripts directly to the memory using some of the whitelisted applications, that is PowerShell, WScript, CScript. Okay, so these are the codes which can directly inject to the memory space of the legitimate process. Next is the same which we discussed in the earlier traditional malware, that is spam, phishing mails, then some of the malicious documents. So this is very important. There are some of the documents which comes with the macro. So macro is nothing but the embedded code which is used mainly in Excel sheets to run the programs, auto calculation. So those things can be done using that. So the similar Excel sheets will be sent. Once you download that Excel sheet, it will ask for enable edit. Okay, when you click on that, it will start running in your system, and it may infect your system. Okay. The next is the code injection, which we already told. Then we have lot of things which are coming from the mail, SMS, and many other entry points. Ultimately, it will write that malicious code which will be run from the memory. Okay, this is one part. The second part is it will use the scheduled task registries to embed these kind of codes. For example, the malware is in the system and it is dormant. Dormant is inactive and it is not running in the system at that point of time. So every day it will wake up at 5:30 in the evening and it will start collecting every data and push it to some server. Again, it will go to dormant mode. So these are the things which is already going on in many of the systems. That's why the organization will recognize that the system was compromised after 3 to 6 months. And this is the reality. Then coming to the registry part, we have two registries mainly. One is the run and another one is run once, where the process is embedded on it and it will start making the process persistent. Persistence is nothing but the process or the malicious process which is running the system, which will also run after the reboot or shutdown. For example, you have infected with the ransomware malware in your system and you shut down the system. Will that malware go out or will it delete? No. Whenever you switch on the system, it will start again. Okay, that is how the persistence is used by the malicious actors. Now, we shall just, I would like to give some of the examples of this fileless cyber attack malwares. One is ransomware. The other part is embedded in malicious documents. So, WannaCry, you all know about that. Patia, Grand Crab, Scorebread. These are the ransomwares which are popular. Then embedded in malicious documents, we can see Emotite, which is very popular, Counter, Paulix, Rosanna. So these are the malwares which we can call it as fileless and very dangerous. So let us start with the case study. So maybe it would be interesting for you. So the IT security team gets an alert from SIEM about suspicious communication using internet relay chat from one of the employees' laptop. So information is passed on to the incident response team for conducting investigation. The IR team takes over the employee's laptop and commences investigation. So this is how normally happens, right? So we shall assume that we are the incident responders now and try to figure out what exactly has happened and what are the steps that we need to take it further. So first we should see what are the questions that we have to answer. So employee's laptop is infected. Yes, we know that. Are we aware of whether the laptop is infected? No. We need to confirm that infection. Still we don't know because the network alerts may be all positive. We don't know, right? So we need to get that information from the alert and we need to go to the system and we need to confirm it, right? So how we can confirm whether it is infected by malware or not? So what are the things that we need to do? So one is the malicious process which is running in the system and what are the mutex which is running at that point of time. Then what are the other processes which is infected, port used for the communication and variant of this particular malware. So now we have entered into a situation where we are doing the investigation in the live environment, right? So we are conducting investigation in live environment. So there are lots of advantages when it compared to dead versus live, right? So many investigators, mainly law enforcement, I can say law enforcement, have this traditional method of pulling the plug from the system during search and seizure of the system, which are in on condition. Okay, whenever they enter into scene, what they do is they will pull the plug and they will seize the hard disk, capture the photos of the system and capture the hard disk. If it is a laptop, they will seize the entire laptop. Okay. But what is the what they have lost in this particular process? We need to understand this, because when the system is in on condition, we have lot of information which is available in the RAM. As I told you in the earlier slides, there are fileless malwares, right, which is only memory resident, and we can identify in the memory only. And also now you can see that RAM is coming in the size of around 8 GB, 16 GB, 32 GB, right? So just imagine how many PDF files can be added in that particular 32 GB RAM space. Lot of things can be added, right? So just for your understanding, so these many informations, maybe 1 lakh pages of information are lost. That information may also have some of the what do you call malicious process, malwares, or any some of the user created artifacts also we will lose. So it's very important to stop pulling the plug when it is in on condition, and we need to start extracting the information in the live mode. And I'll also give you when we need to use this, when it is encryption is on. Okay. So now coming to this live forensics techniques, it's a very important task by the law enforcement to have that information. So coming to what an investigating officer may expect from live forensics during incident response. This is very important. So this will give a lot of information that why we need to do the live forensics. For when it comes to organizations, say suppose you have infected from the ransomware and you shut down the system, or you pull the plug, you abruptly stop the system. So the lot of information which is available in the system is lost. Right. So what is lost, we can understand from this. One is the running process and services, where it may be one process may be malware. Next is unpacked, decrypted versions of protected programs. So this is very important. See, whenever the malware author prepares a malware, he will pack it in such a way that it will bypass the antivirus and sit in the hard disk, right? So now it is in hard disk and it is packed, right? Whenever you click on that particular this packed malware, it will unpack and open in the RAM, and it will be in a native format in the RAM, where the investigators can easily detect that, trace and identify. That's why it's very important. Next is the system information. Normally we have what is the configuration, what is the username, what capacity of the hard disk, many details will be there. Logged in users, how many users have been logged in at that point of time. Live forensics is restricted to the current status of the system. It can't go back to years or months back. Then registry hives in use by organized programs, open network connections. So you need to identify, since this is a network related class, we need to identify what are the open network connections. So once you shut down the system, maybe it is lost. So ARP, address resolution program, cache is lost, where you can identify how many systems are connected, what are the IP mapping to that particular IPs, remittance of this chats, communications in social network, recent web browsing, recent web browsing activities, which is included with this private mode chat, and also some of the Tor browser activities we can also capture in the using the RAM dump or live forensics. So recent communication via webmail systems, running malwares, decryption keys for encrypted volumes mounted at time of the capture. Yeah, this is very, very important. So whenever you see the system, maybe I will give an example. You have a system and you have logged one of the drive with the BitLocker encryption, right? And while using the system, you open that lock and start using, right? So when you come with the live forensics point of view or incident response, the incident responder have the what do you call opportunity to logically image that particular content because it is decrypted at that point of time, and he can investigate. Okay. If it is a system which is switched off, definitely it will be the contents in the hard disk will be encrypted and saved. So it's very difficult to get the information without the decryption key. So factors to consider: one is what to seize first. Okay, so one is the order of volatility says that how the data will disappear fastly, rapidly. CPU, cache and registry content, routing table, ARP cache, process table, kernel statistics. Then coming to RAM, then temporary file, swap space, page file, those things, data on hard disk, remotely logged data, archival data. So coming to live memory acquisition, so when we use this is in the scenario we told that yes, we are into this particular live forensics and we are capturing the information from the system. So at that point of time we are using this some of the tools to extract the data. Okay, so and also I've added few of the procedural aspect also, so that it should not mislead the investigators. Okay. One is live memory, where you will be copying the live system data from the system, but here it is it is very much important to have the administrator level privileges, and you should be cautious to know that the results in memory sphere where data is modified during the acquisition process. So that also is very important. When it comes to providing the digital evidence, it should be admissible in the court of law. So whatever you do, you need to document the things. That is one thing. The second thing is you should know what is happening. If I do this activity, what are the changes that is happening to the system, so that you can document those things. So next is volatile system data or processes. So in this phase, we can use some of the scripts which are written in Python, okay, and many other programming language. You can copy in the pen drive or run the script in the suspect systems, and you can able to collect the running process which are having the connections, that is network connections, passwords, file systems, open sockets, connected users, etc. So coming to the live file system acquisition, where we will boot the system, get the system's particular dump. Okay, so that is called disk imaging. I will not be explaining more on that, But you should remember one thing, as encryption may prevent access to data after shutdown, the file system should be acquired live. So I told you earlier also, the logical extraction will help in this particular case. So limitation, the examiner should be aware of interacting with particular live systems, and we need to know what exactly has happened and what are the changes that I'm doing on the suspect system. So examiner should maintain detailed documentation of all the actions taken. So there is a tool. It's in whatever I use. The tools which I'm using here are free and open source tools. So you can download and you can use it, and also you can suggest your students to download the same. So this is CANE. One is computer aided investigative environment, where you can run in these virtual machines. Also, it comes with a bundle of tools where you can use it for live forensics. I will be explaining it now. So what it offers is it will come with a bouquet of tools which can be used at the crime scene. Okay, when the system is in on condition. So it also contains a a bundle of Windows incident response tools. Okay, it can be downloaded from this website, barrett.sec.org. I will also explain you how this can be used in the live system. So there is an .ios file available. Let me show you this. Okay. So this is a website, and this is where you can find this kn11.0.iso. So you can burn this particular ISO file image into the pen drive. So it should be minimum 4 GB, and it can use FAT32. And you can use the tool called Rufus, where it will help in creating this bootable pen drive, where you can use that pen drive in the live forensics. You can connect that to the suspect system, and you can get that information. So this is the tool. These are the information it will have. Okay, so you need to remember that this can also be used to live boot the system and access the content of the suspect system in a read-only mode. So now we are talking about the live forensics, but if the system is in off condition also, we can use that pen drive and boot from that particular pen drive, so that we can bypass many of the passwords. So here at the right hand side, you can see there are a lot of tools available. Mainly the Nearsoft tools are good. You can use those things. Then Timeline is good. So there are many tools which are available. So where you can download that ISO, burn that ISO image in the pen drive, carry that pen drive to the crime scene, connect that, and you open that and you start running the plugins available in that. So for example, I'm running one tool here. The tool name is Live TCP UDP Watch. So this is a network forensic tool where you can capture many of the information from the connections out, which are in and out. You can see here, this is the process ID 4020. Process ID is 4020. Local address, that is 192.168.102.40. This is the local IP of the employee system. Then remote address 192.168.104.15. So this is the IP of the server. So how it is connecting? It is using a what you call remote port name also, and it is connecting using 3389. So you all know that 3398 is the RDP, remote desktop. So it is using the remote desktop phone number to connect with that server. And this is a proof that one of the employee is connecting to the server, okay, using RDP. So likewise, we have lot of tools available. I am just giving you the one example here. Okay, during the incident response, in most of the cases, you will have to access the malware sample, but you may only have the memory image of a suspect system. So what happens during the incident response is you will not have an access to the malware sample. You need to identify, first of all, you need to identify whether the system is infected by the malware or not. That is first thing. The second thing is, if infected, what is the behavior and what exactly it is doing, and what are the connections it is doing to the other foreign IPs. After that, we need to identify this malware and capture that. And we can do, using that sample, we can do static analysis, dynamic analysis, code analysis, that is reverse engineering malware, memory forensics. We can do many of the activities. So coming to the memory forensics part, so I hope most of them are aware of this. Let me explain you what is this. The memory forensics is nothing but the study of the RAM content of the target machine. So whenever we say that yes, this system was involved in the criminal activity, so we can get the RAM dump of it and start analyzing what are the process involved and whether it is malicious or not, and many things can be done using this memory dump. Okay, what this particular memory dump contains is, it's in we can say it's in snapshot of the current status of the system. So why we would be doing this memory forensics? Why it is required in the investigation? So there are two use cases. One is incident response, where we are having the session here on the incident response and the malware analysis. So first one is the incident response, where you need to figure out quickly what system has infected. After that, you need to identify the malware. Then we need to do the malware analysis using any of the techniques, static, hybrid, then this code analysis and many others. So what this memory forensics reveal is, it's mainly related to malware, because it will identify the anomalies behavior in the malware. As I told you, there are lots of fileless malwares available. For that, the memory forensics technique should be used to identify the malicious behavior. If we are not doing it, we will definitely don't get any of the artifacts in the disk. So what it reveals, let us know. One is the process and threats. Threats are the process objects which will help in running the process. Then the malware, network sockets, URLs. We shall look into these particular network traffics and what are the connections in that case study. Then you have URLs, IPs, and we can get this open file. So open file is nothing but, as I told you, in the disk it is packed. Whatever the file, it may be in the packed, but once you run that particular packed file, it will unpack in the memory and we can easily identify and detect it. Some of the passwords, clipboards, encryption keys we can identify. Hardware and software configurations, which is in the registries, we can identify. Then registry keys, event logs that can be captured from the memory dump using this memory forensic techniques. So how to do this? I have a few techniques to show you using that case study. So first of all, we need to identify how to acquire the RAM dump. So let me show you. So let me show you how to capture the RAM. So I have connected to the USB DSCI-1. I'm opening the tool called FTK Imager Lite. I'm just quickly showing you. It takes time. So I opened FTK Lite tool, which was copied in the pen drive. It's a portable executable where you can just copy. Installation is not required. And make sure that you will not store that image copy or memory dump in the suspect system itself, in the hard disk. You should copy that back to the pen drive only. You should be too cautious because you will end up with tampering the suspect data. So RAM dump will start in this way. So now it's completed. And removing this pen drive is also very important. Abruptly, if you disconnect it, there may be a chance of corrupting that file. So coming to the analysis part, I hope you remember that case where, let me tell you the gist of the case where we need to identify whether the malware has infected that machine or not. That is the first thing. If infected, what are the malicious programs that was running on that particular machine? So let me go open the VMware to show you how to run this, how to do the analysis. I hope everybody can view this. So let me show you. We have captured the memory dump, as you are aware. So let me go to the case and let me find this dump. So this is memdump 5519.mem. So this is the memory dump which we have captured from the employee's system. And we have few questions. As an incident responders, we need to answer those questions. So what are those questions? Hope you remember that. So whether this particular system is infected by malware or not, and what are the process that is infected, and what is the modus operandi or behavior of that particular process. Fine. So are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir. We can see, sir.
Okay, thank you. Hope this will be very much interested because I have created this for you to understand better. Okay, so we shall start investigating, and we will definitely find some of the results. Okay, fine. So let us start with this. So I'm using a tool called volatility. So I'm running the script, that is vivol.py. -f is the switch to add the file. So here the file is memdump 5519.mem. Please remember this. This is the memory which we have captured from the suspect system, and this holds the RAM content. Okay. Next, we will try to figure out what are the details available in this particular image. We shall identify the structure of this particular memory dump, which what type of so what type of structure it is using. We call it as a profile. So maybe profile is nothing but the operating system or some of the key elements which is required to run through this particular image. So you can see that it is determining the profile from KDBG search. So KDBG is kernel debugger data block. Okay. So what it does is this is a first pointer to identify all other upcoming processes. Okay. So this is mainly used to parse the particular artifact. Okay. So you can see this KDBG address. So this is what it was searching and it was taking a lot of time to search in. So you can use -G switch and we can add this particular thing so that the future parsing of this particular artifacts becomes very fast. So we can understand from this is one is Win7 service pack 1, that is x86 is 32-bit operating system, and this image was captured at this time, okay, when the RAM dump was taken. So these are the two information which we got. So now let us run another plugin to understand what are the process that is running in the system. I'm giving this input. So then I'm adding the profile. So what is the profile here? This is the profile. I'll copy and paste this profile. Okay. Then I'm using the plugin called TSList. So what this does is this will list out all the process which was running at that point of time. You can see this process. This is a virtual address where that process is stored. Name of the process, PID is process ID, PPID is parent process ID, threads are the process object which will run the process. So there is only one process of system, but there are 87 instances which is running. So handles are the again process objects which will help in opening the particular connection to file, registry, event, and many other things. And also we can see at what time this process was started. Okay. So let me use the network related things. Okay, since you are interested with the network things, so we shall use a plugin called NetScan. We can use a plugin called NetScan. So this will give the information of what are the connections that the system is doing at that point of time. So now it is scanning to the system. Let us see what it is showing. Zoom. Okay, fine. So you can see that. Let me give you one example here. There is a Firefox which is doing some connection with. You can see that 443 is there. 443 is HTTPS. The Firefox doing the connection using 443, that is HTTPS, is normal, right? But there are some process which is doing some of the connections to the foreign IP. Okay, using this. So here, this is the IP of the employee where we have seized the system, and this particular private IP is doing the connection to this public IP using 6667 port. So this is usually used for IRC communication, internet relay chat, right? And it is showing some of the closed connections. So PID is 3288. The process is WUAUMQR.exe. And there are many other connections here. This looks normal, right? So let us focus on this. So one thing which I wanted to highlight is it's not only the Wireshark which will get you the packet information. You can use these kind of tools to get the information of what exactly has happened at that point of time. Okay, so now let us dig deep into that particular process, which the process ID, I hope you remember, the process ID is 3288. -P is the -P is the process, 3288 is the process ID. Let us look into handles of type mutex. So let us see what comes in. Okay, so now we got this information. So what we can able to see, we have used the suspicious process ID handles, and we got this IT calculator, which is in the downloads folder. Okay. So what is this IT calculator? Let us know. We can use file scan plugin and grep this IT calculator. Let us see what comes in. So whether this IT calculator is available in the memory or not, that is what we are trying to figure out. So we can see that there are a lot of things there. One is itcalculator.exe, IT calculator. So can you able to see there are a lot of traces available in this particular example. Okay. Next, what we found here is there are two files which were suspicious. One was 3288, the other one was this IT calculator. So let us again run this PS list to know whether these particular processes are connected to each other, associated to each other. So let us see this IT calculator which we saw, then this process also we saw some making some malicious connection, and if you can see this, the time difference is only 36 seconds, where we can say that this IT calculator.exe has triggered this process after 36 seconds. Okay. Now we need to dig deep into it. So let me show you, since we have less time, we shall show it in the PPT only. So these are the things which we already did. PS list. Yeah, up to this we have done. Okay, so this is the parent-child relationship where we can use the pscan command to get this. So this particular wininit.exe is doing the connection here, and this is this having a child services.exe, and again the services.exe is running svc host.exe. Okay, so these are the things which we need to figure out while identifying whether the process is malicious or not. Okay. Okay. So now the processes, we have identified two process, and now we will try to uh, dump that particular .exe using the plugin called prop dump. So let me get this. Yes, sir. Fine. So you can see here, I'm trying to dump this prop dump -p3288-d, but you need to remember one thing: all the details which we are expecting from the memory may not be available in every cases, because it is a dump. It will not have any structure in it. So, and also there are two memories in that. One is paged whole memory, and another one is non-paged. Okay. So there are few things which will be paged. Okay, for example, network connections, it will not be paged. It will be available in the memory for a long time because it is required, right? So that's why you can dig deep into it and you can analyze many of the artifacts which is related to network. Okay. So when it comes to open files, it's very less possibilities of getting the data from the memory, because it is always paged in some of the files like page file, swap files. So now I am using it plugin called memdump. What this plugin will does is it will capture the process memory of that particular process. So I'm doing this of this process which we have identified as maybe suspicious. So then I have extracted the strings out of it and found a very interesting thing, that is in the Windows folder system32 it was the keylog.txt was there, and this was run from the abnormal location, that is Windows system32 and the process here, because in Windows system32 there will be only the system applications will run normal, and these are the run once and run registries which is used by this malicious process, which ensures that it is persistent, it is surviving the boot. Okay, next we can see some of the information that it is uploading something to the IP, some of the server, and these nick percentages, join percentages. This is an example for IRC communication. So very interesting thing, we have identified the case in this way. So where we can see that, dear customer, file your IT returns at zero cost, check now. Okay, so same thing appears here also. This look more like an subject of the email, right? So after that, he has used Facebook email ID. Then this is the password of the Facebook account. Then he has used Swiggy Firefox, where he has used Swiggy. Then this is the phone number, OTP, then RR Nagar 115 near Lalita School. Then this is very crucial. This is the 16-digit card number followed by expiry date and CVV number, name of the person, and the OTP. So these things are captured in this particular memory space. So we can say that there is some what you call suspicious activities going on. So let us figure out that. And very important thing when it comes to network is, it is showing that it has connection with 209.126.201.22. So this is where it is connecting to. This is the command and control IP. So coming to again dig deep into and figure out what is the timeline, what is happening exactly in the memory. So it will be listed in this way. So let us understand how the process run in this way. One is, it is running the IT calculator. So let us check what are the things which are running around the time. So one, it is loading from this, from the downloads folder, then it is running, it is collecting all the DLLs. DLLs are the dynamic link libraries which help in running the process. It is capturing all the things and it is running here. What is running the process? The thread is running the process. You can see here. So whenever you double click on a process, it will load all the what do you call DLLs which are required to run that process, and at last the .exe is also loaded and it will run by the thread. These are all things will be in memory space of the RAM. So the another process which is doing some opening some handle to the key to write some of the write onto some of the registry files, and again it is running 4 instance it is running. So to conclude that, found the system and we identified that there was a message came to the employees system saying that, dear customer, file your IT returns at zero cost. Check now. So this is, dear customer, this is to inform you that income tax department has successfully completed account audit for this quarter. A review of tax column related to you are eligible for a tax refund of rupees 8,000, which is tax excessive accumulated over time for your salary account in our bank. So all you have to do is you need to download this IT calculator. So thinking that as though it is from the legitimate tax department, the employee has downloaded this and the system got compromised and his card details and many of the credentials like Facebook credentials was also captured. This is one example where it says that how much awareness with respect to the employees and as well as how much ready the incident responder should be. So let me show you how we can copy the file. As we saw, there is some file which is at the suspicious location. So let me copy that. Windows System 32. So we are trying to open that keylog.exe. It's not available, but it was showing in the memory. So what we can do is, it may be hidden, right? We can search. See, search that malware which we found in the memory. So I'm copying it. You can able to see copying it. Okay. So let me show you quickly how the dynamic analysis on this particular thing can be done. So this includes some of the networking tools like Wireshark, and also volatility. I've also explained you how this volatility will help in also analyzing these particular network activities. We have figured out this IPs also. So now I will be running this. So I'm creating the environment to run the sample malware to conduct the dynamic analysis. I'm running all the servers. I'm simulating that. So all the simulations is running now. Now I'm running Wireshark also. So this you can try, because this will give a lot of information on the particular network traffic. So now I will run the process. I'm running Noribin. So Noribin.py is it's like in Procma, so where it will monitors the system activities and captures. So it's monitoring now. So you can see this I'm also using another tool called Process Hacker. So that Process Hacker will give you the information, what are the processes which are running in the system, and also what are the handles, mutant, all the process objects which is responsible for that activity, it will be showing. So I am running the process. Let us see what are the activities that it does. You can see I am stopping it now. So these are the process which is running now in the Process Hacker tool. So I am trying to write something. I have written, my name is Shasidhar TK. Now I am terminating the process. I am stopping the Noribin, which was running at the background. So this is the Wireshark which is captured. I am stopping that also now. I stopped the simulation. Let me see what is it doing now. So Noribin has created the activity list which this process was doing to make us understand what it is doing in the system. Yeah. So we could see that there are a lot of process which is running. See, this is the process which we saw while doing the memory analysis. The same thing can be saw here also. It is running in system 32. And it is opening lot of dumping lot of .exe files. So it is also dumping elog.txt. And this is the file which it is capturing, elog.txt, where it is keeping all the entries what the victim types in. So coming to this Wireshark log details, so you can see that it is making so you can see that the source IP 192.168.1.50. It is making a connection to remote IP, that is 209.126.201.20, and it is using the protocol TCP, and it is using the port 6667. So that is the IRC channel, and it is sending some sync request. It is getting the acknowledgement, everything we can see here. The malicious IP address which we found in the memory, the same IP address we can find here also. So we can follow the TCP stream. It is showing this the username where it is capturing, sending through IRC communication. So if you can check with the system, it will show the IP address 192.168.1.50, then the host name, then it is showing the username also. So it is sending those information to the command and control IP. Okay, thank you. I would like to close this.
Right. Are there any questions from the participant side? If you have any, please unmute yourself and you can ask Shasidhar sir, or you can also type in the chat box so that we can pick up something and try to answer. Okay, so we presume that there are no questions from the participant side and they're happy with the presentation. So it's time to thank our speaker of the session, Mr. Shasidhar TK sir. Thank you very much, sir, for enlightening us with the type of malicious software that can harm. And the case studies were really very interesting that you took to show us the activities that will take place after it is infected. So I think this will definitely benefit our students and the teachers who are especially doing their course and research on the field of cyber security, network security. Okay. So on behalf of the Department of Electronics and Telecommunication Engineering, Bangalore Institute of Technology, I thank you for accepting our invitation and delivering this very useful session. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to thank BIT College for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, dear participants, the feedback form is sent in the chat box. You can now give your feedback. And we come to the end of this session and will again resume at 3:45 for the final session of the day. So, let's keep in touch. Hello, sir. Hello. Hello, Shasidhar sir.
Sir, I am leaving, sir. Thank you.
Sir, will you please share the PPT to us, sir, so that we can send it
Sure,
back?
sir. Sure. Give me some
Yes.
time. I will share something.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
practice and the application of threat modeling as a core security assurance activity. And then we'll also briefly touch upon in the first session about the problem of developing the attacker's mindset. I'm sure many of us would be keep hearing when it comes to security, we need to think like an attacker, but hardly we get a chance to think like an attacker. We don't have probably enough tools or methodologies to behave like that one instead of really trying to get experience after the attack has actually happened in real world. So we'll see how we can probably handle that challenge. In the second 20 minutes, we'll see what are the various security projects and initiatives. Basically, in simple terms, what is a common body of knowledge when it comes to threat modeling approaches? And we'll also see how security controls are going to be interlocking with that, because it is not about just talking about threats and attacks, but also trying to talk from a protection perspective, what controls we have, and how these two arenas, the threats and the controls, can talk with each other. What's the relationship between them, and how in this entire process we can make even a normal person without deep subject matter expertise be able to leverage this entire idea. And while we do this, we'll introduce and understand one of the major common body of knowledge when it comes to modern day cyber threat analysis, which is the project by MITRE, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Research and Engineering, MITRE. And then they have a special project. Among the multiple projects they have, one of the special project they have is ATT&CK. It stands for ATT ampersand C and K. So it stands for adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. We'll talk more about it. And we'll also briefly touch upon how other MITRE projects like CWE, Defend, Shield, and Engage are trying to bridge the gaps in this entire area. And in the last 15-20 minutes, we'll see how we can connect these dots. We understand threats, we understand the controls, we'll use the MITRE's attack framework to apply this on top of existing traditional threat model approaches, and we will see how the gaps in our traditional threat model approaches can be overcome, or can at least have the possibility of overcoming using the MITRE attack framework. And then we'll also take an example from the MITRE's project to see if we can apply our lessons learned or our learnings, and then see if this is really something that we can take into practice and further application. All right. I hope this makes sense to everyone. So if you have any questions or suggestions before we start this deep dive, maybe this is a good time to share. Are we all fine with this approach, or what we're going to talk next an hour?
Yes, sir, that will be fine, sir.
All right, thank you. Let's take a step back and see what's happening in today's world, right? So what are we seeing? What type of problems we are facing in the industry? So this is a beautiful pictograph from a consulting organization called Optiv. So I'm sure being in academics, most of us would recollect the structure here that sounds similar to a periodic table from a chemistry class, right? So as you can see that today's modern day corporates and modern day organizations, whether it is academic institutions or corporates, have a variety of areas when it comes to security that they need to focus on. There are some basic business approaches, business fundamentals. There are some IT related fundamentals, security fundamentals. There are some advanced capabilities, and also how do we handle with the emerging technologies. And while we try to handle all this, we do have threats or from threat actors, starting from script kiddies all the way up to nation state actors who are trying to constantly attack our systems and gain or disrupt our functioning, right? So this beautiful picture from this Optiv Consulting depicts the various areas that a modern day chief security officer or chief information security officer needs to contemplate with. And the reason why we need to understand this landscape is to give you a perspective of the complexity of this entire domain. And especially if I have to pick a couple of important examples, which overlaps with the emerging areas as well as with the fundamental areas, the ability to respond to threats, the ability to stay up to date when it comes to security patches via vulnerability scanning or via penetration testing, or via reducing application level or software code level vulnerabilities via application security programs. So each organization and each institution need to have a very structured program covering many of these facets in order for us to handle the modern day cyber threats. So with this backdrop, we'll step next into a slide that wants us to think about what is the dilemma or what is the challenge that a modern day defender or a modern day preventer. I use this word defender because in cyber context, it will be more appropriate. And I use the word preventer because when you're developing a software or writing a piece of code, you are responsible, or the teams which are responsible for deploying this code and securely running can be referred as preventers. So in a typical corporate setup, we'll have both sides of groups, right? Traditionally, these defenders and preventers together are referred as blue team, which are kind of lifesavers for you. And there is also another team which you might see in an organization called red team, which are basically ethical hackers or team members who are responsible for uncovering the vulnerabilities in your systems and corporate assets. So what's the dilemma they have, right? So if you look back 20 years ago, so our approach has been reactive. When I say reactive, when an attack happens or when a vulnerability is disclosed in public domain, we react by saving ourselves from the attack. So we will only look at things after it has happened. In that context, it is reactive. In the last one decade, right, we have stepped into more a proactive approach. In the sense, we had a lot of tools, scanners, or approaches to discover flaws at various stages, whether it is the design, develop, testing, deploy, operations. In various stages, we have used various tools and also systemic approaches to identify the attacks before the attack actually happens, and then detect the vulnerabilities and then remediate them via patching, right? So this is the era of proactive defense. But again, we still keep hearing a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of issues, and still a lot of data breaches, right? So that's what requires us to think in the next stage, which is what is a lot of organizations and corporates are focusing in the last half decade or so, is about how do we get into informed defense. Now, when we talking about informed defense, what we mean is we need to really cannot afford to wait till an attack happens. We need that information much earlier, right? So this is getting slowly into the landscape of intelligence. Something similar in your military domain or in your uh, terrorism domain, right? So we see national security agencies have various sources of intelligence based on which they predict where a next attack could likely happen. It could be a terrorist attack or it could be any other disturbance to the public and civil of a country, right? So in a similar approach, we need an intelligence angle to this. Now, how do we really get that intelligence? If we get that intelligence and then fine tune our defenses, then it is possible, at least in theory, we could come up with resilient and attack resistant softwares and enterprise systems. So that's the stage that we are all heading to. I think many organizations are in that journey, especially in the third phase. Now we understand this, but how do we really get that? So that's what we're going to talk a little more in this conversation, right? Or in this discussion. So we need to develop that intelligence. So in order to develop that, we're going to leverage the common body of knowledge. And not just a common body of knowledge, but also how do we systematically apply this understanding of adversary tradecraft. When we say adversary tradecraft, it could be general attackers, or it could be nation state hackers, or it could be people who are trying to perform frauds in your financial institutions. Variety of personas, variety of people can do damage to an organization. So in general, we can call all of them as adversaries or attackers. Unless we understand how attackers operate, it is likely not possible to develop informed defense. If we can't have an informed defense approach, our ability to develop resilient and attack resistant software is going to be challenged, right? So once you develop this intelligence or continuously evolve this over a period of time and integrate that, or basically bake that into your standard processes, whether it is secure development lifecycle activities or whether it is about the threat modeling, which is the focus of our conversation today. If we do those two things and repeat and rinse it over a period of time, then it is possible that we might get a better protection, or we might be able to develop the informed defense approach. So we are going to talk extensively on this particular area of informed defense and how we can use MITRE attack frameworks as an approach towards that. Now, this sets us the challenge, right? So what is that we are heading towards? We don't probably have very good for frameworks, at least few years ago, to holistically identify threats, especially from an attacker's perspective. We were relying too much on the subject matter experts or people who are well versed in security, because of which, due to lack of awareness and lack of visibility, the general team members who are working on IT and other teams, or even in academic institutions, they do not have the know-how. And then we do have this challenge of adversaries keep changing their techniques. There is no documented evolution of how the adversaries changes their tactics, techniques, and procedures. And even though that information is available, it is available only with certain commercial entities. They are not available for access to public domain. And even if they were available, they were not in a format that is easily consumable to modern day practitioners. In addition, we also had this multiple data sets, whether if it is a software security team or whether it is a cyber defense team. They used different types of data. For example, in cyber world, they will be using terms like threats, attacks, and vulnerabilities, whereas in the software world, they'll be using the terms like weaknesses, weakness classes, and variety of other terms. So we need to really have these two teams come together and probably use a common set of language so that we can facilitate knowledge sharing between the defenders who who protect this software after it is deployed, and the software team who actually create the software that the defenders will eventually protect once it is deployed. So we need to bring these two teams together in order to really solve this challenge, which is exactly what is the advantage of the homegrown model, as they call it, right? So the red team, which is basically trying to simulate an attacker's models and do some adversarial simulation. At the same time, there is a blue team which is trying to protect and detect and respond. So if these two teams can talk with each other in any corporate world, there is a plenty of advantage that can be leveraged in addition to using the standard frameworks and the common body of knowledge. So I hope this gives a little bit of a context on what you're going to talk and how you're going to try to merge these two conversations between these two teams and eventually use the common body of knowledge from MITRE attack framework to apply it into the threat modeling. Is everybody on the same page as far as this definition of problem and logic solution?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. So before we move on, let's do a quick refresher on the threat modeler. I'm assuming a lot of you are familiar with what is threat model and how to do it and what are the approaches. But for the benefit of everybody, let's quickly refresh this. So the idea of threat modeling is to perform a review and analysis of what are the likely threats to a software or to a system as a whole. Right. Why do we do threat model? In order to identify flaws at the design level. So why do we need to do this even before we start writing our software? Because the cost of fixing a security issue too late in the cycle is huge and it is significant. That's the reason it is important to perform design level reviews to identify design level flaws even before the first line of software can be written. Right, so that's the fundamental idea. But if you look at the formal definitions, right, I've just picked up some examples from Wikipedia. OAS, one of the popular security knowledge base, if you want to say, Open Web Application Security Project. And also I picked up a definition or a reference from Adam Shostock, one of the pioneers as far as threat model research and education is concerned. So as you can see, there are multiple definitions or description about what threat model is. It is a process by which threats can be identified, prioritized from an attacker's point of view. And there is another definition that talks about threats and mitigations in the context of protecting your assets or protecting something that you consider as valuable. There's another definition that talks about how do you use abstractions That's a very interesting term. Abstractions to think about risks. We cannot really see the risks as it is because it has not manifested in practice, because the software has not been written. Just doing the whiteboard, just doing the threat analysis at the design stage, we are going to do some abstractions and simulate what are the likely threats. So if you look at all these things, one common theme I personally see is threat model is a way to evaluate trust. So before we buy a house, before we buy a gadget, before we uh, even have a friendship or a relationship in our real world, we always evaluate trust. Can I trust the gadget? Can I trust the building? Can I trust this person? That's a fundamental human nature. Similarly, the same nature is manifesting here as well. So before you communicate with the software, before you establish any type of transaction, or before you install something, before you work on something, you want to know whether it is trustable. In order to establish the trust and to prove that the trust is formally existing, threat model is a great utility or a great tool. So one key point I infer here is trust is inversely proportional to threat. For example, if there are less threats or no threats, your trust is more, and vice versa, right? So that's the context with which we are going to operate here. So now, who are the folks who will be involved or who will be required to do this activity? There are a variety of team members, right? Starting from your engineers or software developers, or the security experts and security team. And also we have product owners. For example, if you're working on a enterprise level software, definitely there will be product managers or product owners and business analysts. Each one of these players are going to play a vital role in performing this model. And the next natural question we will generally have is, how do we really go about it? So in order to go about this, Adam Shostak, one of the pointer, has given this four-pointed approach, right? So it's a very important question. I would request all of you to keep these 4-point questions because we're going to repeatedly apply this in our illustration example later in the slides. So first question is, what are we building? What's that we are trying to build? What's that we are trying to protect, in other words, right? The second question is, as part of this design and building, what can go wrong? Where do things can fail? Where do things can really affect the trust that we are trying to seek, right? And the third question is, once we know that these are the threats, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to live with it? Are we going to face it? Are we going to ignore it? Variety of choices. And then finally, as a retrospective, did we do a good job or not, right? I'm sure many of you should be familiar with this overview, but I'm just trying to give a refresher. And before we move on, I know the popular question that we often get is, hey, what are the tools I can use? Can you give me the list of tools? I want to emphasize it's more important to focus on the art or the signs of doing a threat model rather than trying to focus too much on the tools. But having said that, here are the some of the good set of tools. All of them are open source tools that anybody can use. The most popular among them is the Microsoft Threat Model tool, the second in the list. And there are also other options. Some are manual, some are automated, some are fully automated, some are semi-automated. And I've not listed any commercial tool because there are various choices, various licensing needs. This session is not about analyzing or evaluating various tools. Rather, this session is about understanding the art and science of threat modeling and how it applies to cybersecurity and what are the emerging approaches to it, and how can we get rid of the existing limitations, right? Before we move on with this, let me take a pause. If anybody has any fundamental questions on threat models, you can ask now, or if you want to ask later, I'm still fine. But if you have anything that is really irking that you need to sort out before we move on, please let me know. Okay. So how do we get this? So we talked enough about threats and threat modeling. So there is this model called Gregorian window or Jogari window, as they generally call us, right? So we have two dimensions, right, of knowing and what are the unknowns, right? So we can just basically bucket all of them into 4 categories. So your known knowns, which basically means that you perform threat modeling using established frameworks. I talked about OASP a few minutes ago, so that's a very good reference. You can use any commercial or open source vulnerability scanners to perform the scans, and then you can infer the threats. Now here, the assumption we are making is we probably using a bunch of open source software, but for the software that you're going to write for that threat model cannot be performed using vulnerability scanners. You have to use OASP top 10 as a reference framework and then analyze if any of these threats are possible as part of your design review, as part of your code review. That's a kind of a known knowns approach. When we say known knowns, basically what we are saying is we do have this challenge of dealing with things that we are pretty much aware of, but we don't know we do know that, but we understand that that is something insecure. We know what this type of threat looks like. We know how to do it right in our choice of language and framework. So those kind of things will come under this one. A good example from OS top 10 is cross-site scripting. I'm assuming everybody is familiar with that type of threat. So basically you don't have an input validation, so you get into that. The second type of category is the known unknowns. So basically what this implies is we are aware, but perhaps we don't understand the full details. For a good example is the passwords in plain text, right? We have seen variety of applications and internet users where we might see passwords are stored in plain text without salting, without hashing. But there are a variety of ways to get it securely implemented. There are 100 different ways to get the password handling wrong. So there could be some automated tools, or there could be some testing like penetration testing that can be used here. So this is the other way of dealing with that. Your threat model can also be done using the common weakness enumeration, which is another MITRE's project. You can Google in the internet and check about it. And then the third and the fourth are the interesting ones where we talk about unknown knowns. So this is an interesting area. Here is where we probably going to spend a little more time, because here we don't know, but somebody else knows about it, but they're not telling. This is an interesting area, right? These threats sit in this quadrant at which probably your collaborative threat modeling exercises between the red team and the blue team that we talked a little earlier would be helpful. So the emphasis is on collaboration here, because we are talking about what we don't know, but somebody else knows. In the other two quadrants, it is not like that, right? So in the other two quadrants, we know what we know. This is the first time we are coming into a quadrant where we don't know what we don't know, right? And then the third option you see is that, or the fourth option you see is the very toughest one, which is not probably something we'll touch upon here, but something for you to know. The unknown unknowns. By definition, neither tools can't find the issues, nor the researchers have discovered it yet. Maybe this is something like a nation state state attackers are actors like big countries, powerful countries try to hoard zero-day vulnerabilities, which is not known in public yet, and use those vulnerabilities to attack in another country. Maybe attack their electrical system, attack their voting mechanism, or attack their public distribution system, variety of things. So that's something that has not come into public. No researcher is aware of it. No tools can catch it. So that's the unknown area, but which is something difficult and which is beyond the scope of the discussion. So we'll not get in there. So if you look at all this thing, the third quadrant at the lower bottom, lower left bottom, is something we're going to emphasize and see a little more about it. Now, when we talk about all these threats, right, the basic question we keep getting is, how do I learn what I don't know? How do I get the knowledge of these threats? How do I get the attacker mindsets? Of course, there are a variety of approaches. We can use structured frameworks, one of which is going to talk about attack a little later. And then we can use a variety of common body of knowledge, whether it is CWE, the CAPAC, the CVE, the CVSS, CWSS, again, a lot of MITRE projects. And again, every organization performs a lot of risk analysis, risk assessments, external penetration testing reports, vulnerability scanning. All those things can also give some insights into what's happening. And the other way to do is about building threat libraries. I'll give you some references at the end on publicly available threat libraries, and each organization is coming up with their own threat library. For example, if an organization is in the financial industry, or if they are in the manufacturing industry, they are coming with their own domain or industry specific threats, which is not common with other threats, right? For example, if an e-commerce company is there, their threats would be different from an oil and gas manufacturing company, right? So the approach there is to build and evolve threat libraries. Again, threat libraries can also be not only built based on domains and sectors, but also can be built based on technology areas. For example, threats in 5G technology could be a lot different from threats in IoT. Threats in medical systems could be a lot different from threats in financial systems like PCI payment card systems, right? Another interesting, important thing we need to understand is the distinction between the software threat modeling and the cyber threat modeling. So there is a heavy overlap, heavy cross borrowing between the two sections. But what is important to understand is that there is a little bit of difference in the two approaches. When it comes to software threat modeling, we're going to look at the various software data processes and then try to apply our analysis whether a given data flow or a given process is carrying any design level flaw. Whereas when it comes to cyber threat modeling, we're going to look more from a holistic system level standpoint, because we are not talking about only the software that we have written. We're going to talk about software that is written by another company, which we are purchasing and deploying in our organization. It could be a free open source software like FOSS, or it could be commercial off the shelf like COTS, or it could be a combination of all the three, right? So internally developed, free open source plus commercial. So that is where cyber threat modeling is going to take a little different edge when it comes to software threat modeling, which is primarily applied for the in-house developed or natively developed codes. And finally, one more source of knowledge is your cyber architecture. As we can see, different organizations are coming up with different approaches, and they use a variety of tools to perform protection and detection of their cyber space. So which means that they're going to come up with various layered approaches, and in each layer they may be using different vendor solutions or their own solutions. So it's important to have a good sense of cybersecurity, cyber architecture before we really do threat modeling for cybersecurity landscape. I hope so far it makes sense to all of you. If there is any question or a feedback or a comment, please do stop me before we move on further. Okay, so what we're going to see now is the next section of understanding how do we really apply this threat model conversation in the arena of secure software development as well as in the cyber threat modeling. So before we get into that, we need to understand the basic triad. I'm sure when it comes to security, we have this confidentiality and integrity and availability, which is generally called as the CIA triad. Similarly, there is also another triad that exists between threat, the control, and the verification. As you can see from this picture, right? So your threat is going to mitigate, or your threat will be mitigated by a control, and your control will be tested by a verification. And when you do a verification activity, which in simple terms you can say is a testing, is going to simulate a threat. So this cyclic function has to really work really well in order for us to really get reliable and a resilient software. Now, in order for this to happen, our focus is on these two aspects here. There is also a lot of insights and verification area, but from the topic standpoint, we are going to focus on these two circles. When it comes to these controls, we'll come to threat in a minute. There are a variety of approaches, right? I'm talking about institutionalizing and doing a methodical process, not necessarily talking about a laundry list of controls. So one of the popular approaches to take the ISO 27034, which is an application security catalog, or in other words, it's a framework or a nomenclature that defines how do we build the control library, right? So here it talks about various activities and how to measure each activities. And then for each of these activities, what's the targeted trust level? And for each of the activities, we are going to give requirements. For example, if you take the case like any design control, least privilege is a very good example. So least privilege, when you talk about security activity, it can be done, least privilege can be verified or implemented either the design stage or at the development stage or at the testing stage. In the design stage, the security activity that they'll be using is the threat model. In the develop stage, what we'll use is a static code analysis, and in the implementation phase, we'll use a dynamic analysis or a penetration testing. So that's the activity. In terms of the measurement, in each of these activities, for least privilege, we need to have various levels. For example, there should be usage of RBAC, role-based access control model. This could be a lower maturity model. If you go to a medium level maturity, it could be a scenario where they need to use a formal models like DAC or discretionary access control or MAC or mandatory access control. Or even if you get into higher levels, the least privilege can be completely eliminated using a zero trust model, zero trust network architecture, right? So the verification talks about the degree to which a given control is implemented. And then the requirements talks about for each of these various categories we talked about, the low, the medium, and the high, how or what are those requirements, right? So that's the controls approach. There is also another ready-made control list that we generally use and in enterprise organizations heavily use is the NIST 800-53. We have multiple revisions. This is more than a decade old standard, and it's very widely used and one of the most popular among the NIST standards. It talks about various control families and control categories. Inside that, there are a lot of control statements. As you can see, access control itself has the access control family has a variety of specific controls that come inside that, right? So this is the what is happening in control landscape. We'll talk a little more later, but when it comes to threat, that's where we are going to focus a lot of these time, right? Now this slide with the background of the threat model refresher we had a little earlier talks about what are all the various approaches to threat modeling, right? So now we understand, right? As far as the process is concerned, as you can see from the left side here, so you model the system, you find the threats, you remediate the threats, and then you validate the model. That's a simplistic flow, right? And then when you have to do this, you can use various approaches because it can be done simply on a whiteboard. It can be done over formal methods using spreadsheets or variety of tools that we saw in the earlier slides. But the focus is not about the tool. The focus is about the approach. The focus is about the art of doing it, right? So for this, there are various frameworks and structures available. So you see two categories out there. The one set is called as the proactive or the protection focus. The other set is called as the reactive or response focused or primarily in the detection focus. Again, I want you to think like the blue team and the red team that we discussed a little earlier. So even though blue team and red team are focused on the detection area, I want to think like one set of these guys are defenders, the bottom one, and the top one is more of a protection focus. Or otherwise, the top one is more about software developers, what models they can use, and the bottom one is more about your cybersecurity team, which is deploying and managing the operations, secure operations of that software, right? Both these teams use two different models here. But again, that's where the problems are going to happen because when you look at the topmost layer, the approaches or the frameworks are little generic in nature. They are all based on various categories of threats. For example, let's pick the most popular one among it is the STRIDE, which stands for the 6 different threat categories: spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privileges, right? So this is going to basically perform a data flow analysis and apply these 6 categories of high-level threats and find out which of the data flows or which of the processes have these threats applicable and what are the standard mitigations, right? Now, this is fine, but again, it does not take into account of various granular specific threats, which is why even though a software or an application that has been performed threat analysis and various types of penetration testing and scanning still has security issues in the field, that does not mean all that we're going to talk in this conversation will completely eliminate, but at least it will reduce eventually. So what can be done? So now in the lower bottom, you see other methods like cyber kill chain, which is detection focused, and we have Veris, which is your uh, it's based on the Verizon database incident report or DBIR. Every year they publish. So Veris is a framework for vocabulary for event recording and incident sharing. So if you look at this, these are all talking about how do you record an incident after it has happened. And the top one talks about how do you really build or detect threats even before the software is written, right? So now there is no communication, there is no exchange, there is no correlation between the two data sets, which is exactly why we are going to see how do we pick one of that technique, which is the most popular among all of them, the attack, and then see how we can bridge this and then have the software developers use the the methods and approaches used by the detection team. That way, we can use the common set of language. At the same time, we can get much closer to the attacker's mindset. At the same time, we will reduce or eliminate the threats or vulnerabilities or attacks that we might miss and eventually end up being discovered by the people outside of your organization, provided we all follow this to the dot and to the T's. Right now, we talked about various approaches here, right? I don't want to get into all the details because we're going to pick one of the approaches, but at the same time, I want to give a little bit of insights as to which one is better suitable. There is a very good research article publication by SEI, Software Engineering Institute. So they have performed a very good analysis on various parameters of each of these approaches that we are talking here. Okay, and I want all of us to give the focus here on STRIDE, which is a Microsoft popularized model, and also another approach called attacker tree, because those are the two approaches that we will likely use in the illustration at the last part of the conversation. Before we move on, it's also important to take a few minutes to understand the MITRE. So MITRE, as I told you, is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Research and Engineering, a Boston-based entity, which is a spin-off from MIT Institute. So they are getting funded by National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US, and they run a variety of projects, and many of these are open sources. You can read about it in the internet and see how they are operating, right? So why we are understanding this is because when we have variety of approaches, variety of artifacts, variety of mechanisms through which threat is being cataloged, vulnerability is being understood, weakness is being evaluated. It's it's common sense for us to reuse them rather than trying to invent anything further. When we have to leverage it, we better understand what are the differences in these knowledge elements and how they are related to each other. I don't want to get into all the granular details here, but I wanted to take a moment on some of the important ones and to show you the difference, right? For example, the first one, CVE, which talks about common vulnerability enumeration, right? It talks about a vulnerability. For example, I'm not sure how many of you heard this very recent news that came last week, last Thursday at midnight, India time, about a vulnerability, a major vulnerability in an open source package called Apache Log4j. It is causing every organization and including every major institute to update or upgrade their systems using the latest version because there is a remote code execution possible in that particular package. So if you go and Google for that, there will be an identifier with the two sets. One is an year 2021 and separated by a dash and a 5-digit identifier given to that vulnerability. So this CVE is a unique identifier to denote each vulnerability. In this case, the Apache Log4j vulnerability. Now, if you look into the CVE, eventually in another few days, they will populate what weakness category that come under. So basically, there are multiple weakness categories and each one of them has a number. For example, remote code execution will come under a certain weakness class or a weakness category. And then the MAEC is also related to the malware enumeration and malware based thing. CAPAC is related to a knowledge base of all the attacks, right? And then finally, we are coming into this topic. What is this attack? This adversarial tactics, techniques, and common body of knowledge, which gives you a great insights not only about attack patterns, but also it gives you a connection between a malware behind an attack and the tools and the adversarial tradecrafts used behind the attack. We'll talk a little more on this. On the picture on the right side gives you the relationship between various things that we are seeing, whether it is a vulnerability, whether it is an attack pattern, whether it is a threat actor and threat campaign. How are these related to each other? This itself is another interesting and a deep dive topic, but for being brief, I just want to move on with this to introducing you to this so that when we use these terms later on, you have a good understanding or at least a basic understanding of what we're going to talk about. So we saw about in the TBC triad, we saw about threats, we saw about controls. So before we move further, we saw in detail about threats earlier. Now let's also see a little more detail about the controls, right? When it comes to controls, after your threat modeling is performed, or even before your threat modeling is done, right? We want to know what are the protections available, what I can do about it. Again, there are various industry references. There is a good reference from CIS. It's open source again, and OASP has something called as ASVS, Application Security Verification Standard. We talked about NIST 800-53 little earlier, and there's also another one from NIST called the CSF, or the cybersecurity framework. So all these frameworks and controls list gives you organization level control structure, or it gives you technical controls that you can directly use, or it gives you little more granular, like your ASVS from OS at a software level. Suppose you're developing a .NET or a Java or a C# or even a Python code, what type of controls you can consider, right? So you can see it is extending from organization level to middle management to architectural level, all the way up to the developers or the software code writers, right? So it's important to keep these controls in mind so that we can have judicious application of this when we really have to do it. So now we're getting into the actual topic. Based on the TVC triad, we saw about controls, we saw about threats. In threats, we saw about various threat modeling approaches in order to detect the threats. And one of the threat modeling approach or threat analysis approach is the MITRE attack framework. We saw that this is primarily used by the red team or your defenders, but we're going to see how this can be given a different application for the purposes of doing proactive analysis or proactive way of detecting threats even before something is deployed, right? So if you look at this entire attack, right? So we do have a detailed knowledge base on this one. So basically, this is a common vocabulary, and then it is used to reduce the friction between your two teams, the blue teams and red teams. Those are the important use cases. And also it is widely used by vendors, security analysts, consultants, and various other third-party people, right? So why do we need to really study this? What's the usefulness of this, right? So now if you look at the cybersecurity incidents, right, it continues to be a key concern. So we have seen WannaCry breach, Equifax breach, Facebook data leaks, variety of major ones in the recent past. To proactively deal with these issues, enterprise systems use threat modeling as one approach that includes identifying the assets and then use the current state of the system and use secure by design tools for developing new systems. So in this entire process, right, we have various uh, knowledge insights that are required. So one of these insights can be garnered by the MITRE attack framework. It serves as a knowledge base for threat modeling language, which also describes your adversary behaviors in order to measure the resiliency of an enterprise systems against various attacks, cyber attacks. So the attack database here contains useful information for, especially for threat modeling. So we are not going to get discuss about each of these elements here, but we will see a quick overview of how this is entirely organized so that you get a good understanding of this approach, right? So this is a globally accessible knowledge base of tactics, techniques, and procedures, generally known as TTPs. This is based on real world observations. This is not somebody's wish list or some academic work. Whatever is happening in the real world, and that is exactly what is being captured here. And now if you look at this entire process, right? So it has a bunch of columns and rows. These columns are called as tactics. This talks about various categories. It gives you the context of a particular threat. It gives you the goal of the attacker or your adversary. And these columns are static in nature, means that they won't change. The column names that you see on the top, like persistence, privilege escalations, defense evasion. So these tactics give you a sense of why somebody is trying to do or what they are trying to do, right? Now, each of these columns has multiple techniques. Now, if you look at the techniques, each of them is denoted through the cells, right? These techniques are also called as actions. It gives you little more details, and there is a unique name in each cell because it gives you a little bit of a procedure about how and what a particular attack can happen. So this matrix consists of more than 12. In fact, they keep adding it. The last is 12, but they are adding it to 13 or 14 level tactics. So that means you have 14 tactics. So now if you see this entire tactics here, I've given a simplified version, so you may not see 12 here in this picture, but you can go to their website and check. So if you see, there is at least at the high level, there is initial access, there is execution, persistence, privilege escalation, defense evasion, credential access, discovery, lateral movement, collection, command and control, exfiltration, and finally impact, right? So, and each of these columns has these techniques that you can see, and there are more than 266 techniques listed there, right? Um, at the enterprise level. So now if you look at the right side of the picture, you do have this matrix available for Windows, Mac OS, Linux, cloud. They even started publishing one for Kubernetes and Dockers. I'll give you those reference links at the end. And also there is separate matrix for mobile and then ICS industrial control systems, right? Now, if you look at these techniques on tactics, especially the tactics, the columns, right? You can pick any of these column and then look at any one of the technique in their website. Then you will see a lot of information about how the technique can be used. For example, if you take um, any technique in that there, right? So there is a technique called um, let's say exploitation of privilege escalation, right? It's a very popular technique. So these are available vulnerabilities in the open source operating systems or proprietary operating systems. And then applications can be that is running on that operating system due to the vulnerability in the operating system can be exploited. So to counter this technique and make it difficult for them to advance, their operations and enterprise servers and software needs to be patched, right? So now this sounds like a common sense knowledge, but again, you can see that this entire knowledge base is organized based on attackers' insights, attackers' capability to cause damage. That's what is most useful about it. So this MITRE thing also contains what we know as um, um, the, the the groups, the attacker groups who are actively using these techniques. So that is why it is more practical, because if you go into their website, you can see that the procedures in the attack website for the example like a lateral transfer or lateral movement, it lists specific groups that have been actively exploiting this. For example, lateral movement is most popular in the group name called APT32, right? And there is also another group called Bits Admin. So these are some of the countries in Russia and China. They're all based out of these countries. These groups are existing and they are known to use these techniques extensively. So that's the idea, or that's the intelligence that we mentioned in the beginning. So if you leverage this particular model and then apply it back into threat modeling, there is going to be a huge advantage, right? So with this, let's try to dig a little more into this particular model and see how we can use it. Now we saw a lot of tactics techniques in their website, and I'm sure each one of you can explore that by going into their website later. But let's try to see if you're able to make sense out of it. Now we saw these, I picked up these 11 or 12 tactics here, and then I gave a simplified meaning of what this means. And then I also wrote a one line word about what's the objective and tried to group them. The reason for this approach is to really see how we can make sense out of this entire table, right? So each of these tactics has either gaining access or keeping access or continue to keep the access or explore further or contact a command and control center like a malicious server hosted by the attacker to download more exploits to cause damage. That's all. So if you see all these tactics, they can be grouped under all these things. So now, okay, fine. How can we bridge? That's our topic, right? How can we use this knowledge in the software development? So the idea is to describe a general attack using this framework, attack framework. How can we do that, right? So if you see this, right, you can formulate or form a general template. So the template is this. You need to use these three columns: the objective, the column 3, the tactic, the column 1. And once you do use both, you go back to the previous slide or to the MITRE attack website. For a chosen tactic, you will have 266 plus techniques for each of the columns. Pick the technique there. So that's the simplest template, right? So let's see whether it is working. So I have given an example here. The adversary is trying to gain access. So we pick this objective called gain access here by a tactic name stealing logins, right? And using credential dumping. So the word stealing logins is the tactic. So this can be coming under this particular one. It's just that instead of using credential access, we're using that. And then if you get into credential dumping as a tactic, under that you will see stealing login as a technique. So this way, if you start writing or start speaking the language of an adversary, we will see a great amount of insights that we can gain. For example, let's say tomorrow a malware is out in the field. We will be able to describe it using this language, and using this language, you can build a user story and convert that user story into an abuser story, and then see if your software or if your application is free from that threat. Right? I'll give another example here. Adversary is trying to keep access, which is the objective number 2 here, by avoiding detection using process hallowing, right? So now process hallowing is a technique. Avoiding detection is a tactic in this one, right? So now, how can we overlap this with all the software security controls? Now we have known generally in order to develop a secure software, we have to use variety of these controls. Now all we have to do is describe a language of an attack using the attack framework from MITRE, and then see when we design some software where these are the basic rules we'll follow, and then match and see whether such a rule or such a control can be implemented. If we do that, then we are trying to really coming up with a attack resilient software, because you're thinking like an attacker already, right? Now let's take an example, right? So this is an example. As an admin, I want to have access to configuration settings in the application. This is a simple use case that you see in any software that you're writing. Now, using this entire thing, you can create an abuse case on how, as a hacker, somebody can read the application log files. So now if you can see very clearly that we get some structure, even without a subject matter expertise or an SME knowledge, anybody with systematically applying this knowledge will be able to become like a very good attack mindset development, right? Now let's take this a little further. I just picked up an example from NCC Group, which is a very popular security research organization. They talked about a particular malware and how a particular malware affected a system, right? And then they used various words here. And in those words, we can see what are all the tactics or techniques from the MITRE matrix. And each of the MITRE matrix also gives you mitigations. The numbers you see with M and followed by a number, that's all about the mitigations. So now let's say create a batch script. This is a technique called scripting. And then use Windows run key. There is a technique called exploiting the registry run keys. Like this, we can keep going, right? So now they are also, if you can see, they are also using the system info and IP config, and there is also a term for dumping credentials, which directly maps to a technique called credential dumping T1003. Now, the advantage of trying to read anything in the context of MITRE attack is it will directly give you the mitigations. And these mitigations would either be at your cyber level or at your secure software development level. So I hope this makes sense to everybody. Do you have any questions before we move on? Okay. So now, before we apply this in practice, let's also see other frameworks that are available from MITRE. So one of them is the Defend framework. So this is a very useful framework from MITRE. So let me see if I can bring this up in the browser for you all. MITRE. Can you all see my browser?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So if you see this, right, so there are various options that you have about how do we really perform this. And the advantage of this one is this has a mapping back into attack. So you can do an attack lookup here, the techniques that we talked about. And also, I just want to show you quickly about the attack matrix itself before that. So you have various options here, like for the cloud, even within cloud, they are keep adding for various models, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and they're also getting specific to Google, Azure, AWS eventually. And you can see from containers also. But what we look at is the enterprise level matrix. And in this one, you have the various tactics and techniques. And let's take any one of them, like privilege escalation. In privilege escalation, let's say we talk about valid accounts. Yeah. If you look at this, you see what is that technique is about, and what are all the sub techniques under that, and what is the technique ID, and also it gives you mapping to CAPAC, which is another MITRE program that we just saw earlier in the slides, and it gives you various attack groups like APT 18, APT 28. If you want to know who is APT 18, you can read through this, right? And then it gives you at the bottom a lot of mitigations, whether you are a software developer or a defender, what you need to do. For example, for this technique, they are saying you need to use a privileged account management, generally called as spam, which is generally integrated with LDAP, or it can be available outside. As far as detection is concerned, suppose you are a cybersecurity defense analyst in the team, you need to know how to detect if such a threat is happening. Then they are telling you instructions on how to create those detections using the matrix here. So if you get into the detections, it tells you about various mechanisms through which you can add those detection, and then they'll give you what are the event IDs, what are the log locations that you need to monitor for such kind of a thing. So similarly, if you come into defend, which is your defense matrix, you can pick up any one of these here and then see how this is circling back into the attack framework here. In the interest of time, I'm just trying to keep it short and then move on into the other conversation. Okay. So there is also another matrix called engage matrix, which is also known as a shield, because if you are trying to work as an organization, you need to know at an organization level what type of policies you need to have. So that's what it shows. So if you see all these white cells, it talks about what actions you can take against your adversary. If you see the gray cells, it talks about the strategical measures that you can have. This is going to be a detailed thing, but that's why I'm just keeping this one and this one too. Now let's come to this understanding. Now, having studied this in detail, how can we use this in threat modeling, right? Now, the way the current day threat modeling is done is it is having four different things, right? You have to identify who are the actors or adversaries, and what is the asset you're trying to protect, and what is the weakness or vulnerability you're going to discover, and what is the technique, the exploit method you're going to use, right? Now, the last one is the important one, the attack technique. So this gives you insights into what is the pattern, what is the modus operandi, and also it gives you the link back to the attacker. So if you look at the stride model that we talked about, right, it gives you 6 categories of threats. It doesn't tell you the motivation or the intention of the attacker. It doesn't tell you the attack pattern. It doesn't tell you the tactics, techniques, and procedure. It gives you at a high level somebody is going to. There is a likelihood of spoofing. There is a likelihood of tampering. But who is going to tamper? What is the exploit method he's going to use? Those information is not available, which is exactly what we are going to take attack matrix from MITRE and overlap it. Now, why we are studying this is because it's important to understand and recognize the limitations of the existing threat model approach, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, right? And then see how the modern day emerging methods are useful to substitute or reduce that weakness. It does not mean stride is not useful or it is going to be obsolete. No, that's not the way. There are certain limitations how we are going to complement that or reduce that limitation using the newer methods. Now, if you use the attack matrix as an organized knowledge base of patterns, then we can use that to gain insights on the patterns and link it back to the attacker. We'll see some examples at the end. So how we will specifically use this, we will do a stride model, and then as a second layer, plug in the attack matrix so that your threat model is much more comprehensive and attacker centric. Let's also take a look at how things can work in practice, right? We talked about a lot about attacks and threats and controls. Let's see how they are getting all connected. We also saw various MITRE projects, right? One of them is CAPEC, another one is CVE, and we also talked about CWEs, and we talked about NIST controls 800-53, right? Now, as you can see that either from the MITRE matrix that we saw or from the other things, right? There is definitely a lot of mapping available. So leveraging these mappings, it's going to be a little more easier than in the past to really protect some our cybersecurity teams. So now this connection and establishing this connection is the crux of your cyber threat modeling using the modern day approach. Earlier, you would be using either one of them in silos, not together. Now we are going to overlap one on top of the other. There are also a lot of public databases available which has uh, constantly improving and publishing these mapping information. So you don't need to really do the mapping by yourself. For example, if you have to look at this, right, you start with a stride, and in the stride you find a particular vulnerability or a design flaw. And this design flaw, you give a CW name. For example, lack of input validation. So that lack of input validation will have a CV ID and name. It will also have a detection and mitigation, and it will also have the related resources. Now, if you pick up those related resources, you can see what are all the vulnerabilities in the industry based on that weakness class has been reported. For example, due to lack of input validation, cross-site scripting can occur. You can see all the cross-site scripting instances that has happened by the appropriate CVE, common vulnerability enumeration identifier. Now, once you know the CVE, within the CVE, they will tell you what are all the attack patterns as well as the CWEs that are related to a given CVE. Now, once you have this, then it can link it back to the attack matrix that you're talking about. Now we are going to use the entire thing in the reverse order. We'll start with the attack matrix, look at the CAPEX if you want. Otherwise, look at directly into the CWEs via the CVEs. If the CV exists, if the CV does not exist, there is going to be a mapping that is going to be available between your attack matrix and your this one. CWEs. Now you can also see the same thing in the MITRE site. If you get into the MITRE site, in some of those approaches they have given. I don't think they have given it for all the attack techniques, but it may be a work in still in development. But for majority of them, they have given the mapping CWEs. Let's see that example when we really come to the working thing. Now we understand the idea now. So we have certain limitations on the stride, and we are going to plug it on top of it the adversarial model from CIC, the attack matrix, and then enhance our threat modeling approach. Now, why this is useful or how this is going to help us is we're going to get that adversarial mindset. And second is we are currently in the modern day world, we are in the process of continuous development and continuous integration. We're also using a lot of agile based software development methods, which means you need to not only protect your software, but also you need to protect the environment in which the software is being developed. Whether it is about your pipeline DevOps models or the variety of tools that we use to develop the software can also be attacked so that they can introduce supply chain attacks, right? So why do we think this is going to work, right? So now let's understand a little bit of an illustration on this, right? And see the advantages and disadvantages of various models. So when it comes to the approaches, we talked about in a slide a variety of approaches, and we chose attack as a likely good approach because the higher level models like your cyber kill chain or the stride gives you abstracted view, or it is dependent on a detailed operational data sets. And when you look at the lower level models like CVEs and CWEs, it gives you a lot of insights into specific instances of vulnerabilities and weakness categories and exploits, but does not give you the balanced approach. One is too detailed, too lower level, another is too abstract and too higher level. We didn't have a good in between layer. But with the MITRE attack level or a model, we have a very good intermediate level because it gives you the adversary perspective, and it is not a perspective of an SME or a theoretical idea. It is based on empirical evidence of various attackers and groups happening in practice, so that people are constantly contributing to this. And then third point is it is behavioral based. It is not based on your indicators of compromise or indicators of attack, or it is more abstract or more higher level than this, because it catches the particular mechanism or a particular TTP, which is generally known as behavioral based. Now we're going to see how we're going to fuse and all this and apply all this into the threat modeling. We'll take an example, but just a quick refresher before we do that example, right? So we understand that attack is primarily designed to cybersecurity by providing penetration testing, red teaming, adversary emulation, various things. But we are particularly choosing one use case, which is the threat modeling. And then we also understand that the MITRE attack framework has 14 different tactics or stages, as we call it, and each of these tactics describes a specific goal. Under each tactics, we had a multiple techniques and sub techniques, which is mapping to various mitigation controls and mapping to CWs as well. And then another important insight we have also understood is the combination of these tactics and techniques provide a very good insight to the threat modeling exercise. Especially if you look at the matrix, you see there is a technique description, there is a platforms affected, there is the details on what permission levels which a particular technique can be executed. There is also information on what are all the data sources and empirical evidence from the field as on today or as on certain time to justify how relevant and how much priority you need to give to that particular approach or technique. And then it also has procedures. For example, a same type of a technique used by different malwares in different ways. So if you're talking about a malware A, it uses the same procedure in type A. If you talk about malware B, it uses the same procedure in a different type than what is used by malware A. And also it gives you a very good mitigations, which is both defense centric as well as protection centric. And this is getting constantly updated. So now with this, let's see how we can apply this entire conversation into a fixed use example. So I have given the source from which I have picked up this example, and the reason is so that you can tomorrow go back, or whenever you think you need some time to reflect upon this, you can do this. So this is a very recent publication, in fact a month ago, by MITRE. So they have taken provided a guidance on how do we approach this entire thing for the medical devices or the medical industry. So they have given examples on how threat modeling for medical devices can happen. I know this can be a little remote use case, but still thought this is a good working example that we can leverage here to put all that we have been discussing into practice, right? So here they are talking about a fictitious example. There is no such device exists, the stroke nerve affective photography system, also known as SNAP. This is something they cooked up. So let's take a moment to understand what the system is about and how it is doing, right? So this represents a hospital workflow. This example is definitely fabricated, and the main system, the SNAP, the stroke nerve affective photography, is basically a medical device, something like your MRI or X-ray. It is used for patients who are either at risk or going to receive a stroke, right? It is expected that the SNAP will be deployed in a dedicated location or a space inside a medical facility or a hospital. So it's going to use a bunch of arrays and sensors. Okay, it's going to scan the patient in a three-dimensional model, the entire nervous system and the circulatory system, and the doctor will keep the data for detailed analysis for various health conditions. Now, the use cases, if you see, right, it could be like a patient can be wearing the sensors for some time. The sensor is not mentioned here, and it's like think of like a watch, right? So once the sensor detects the data that there are some parameters in the patient's body which could likely give an indication of a stroke that is going to come up in some time. So the sensor or the wristwatch that is tied to the patient's hand uploads all this data continuously to the cloud infrastructure set up by the hospital, and then it is constantly reviewed by the physician responsible for the patient. So once the patient visits the physician, the data shows and they do the data analysis and then make a determination that there is a possibility of a stroke, right? In order to really confirm that, the doctor advises the patient to go through some additional scans or analysis so that the doctor can analyze the results and then recommend if additional monitoring is required or if there is any treatment required. So as you can see from this picture, right, there are major components here in the system that is actually installed on the doctor premises or the health facility. So there is a base platform mounted on the floor with 3 vertical cadences or with motors. You can think of this as a scanning mission or the scanning ring. Um, the scanning ring contains a lot of sensors and the data is passed on to the computer behind it. And also there is a scanning control station, which is number 3 here, which is basically to kickstart the scan, collect the data, and then store all this, and then basically your image management system. Now, I'm skipping a lot of other details which you can read from the link I've given, but you need to look at the control, right? So now in this control station or the number 3, so you can see that there is a lot of things that could be happening. So there could be something called a EHR, the electronic health record of the patient. And also there is a picture archiving and communication system, PACS or PACS. So these are the 2 things that could be happening in the control station. And then there is a dedicated computers running with Windows 7 with proprietary medical software to perform the or interact with the Snap platform. And then you can see that the control station sends the data to PACS system using certain protocol. We'll see that in little later, and communicates back to the EHR or the hospital health record system, more like a database of health records. So you can see that the large amounts of data could be managed by this control station. It has a dedicated cabling. There is a Ethernet Wi-Fi could be likely there and variety of things. And there are also safety considerations. So what we need to look at here in the system is there is no description of the process of how clinician enters the patient information or how they initiate the scan or how they stop the scan, right? Because those could be sources of your threats. And also if you can see a similar level of ambiguity is present in the uh, Snap system, because we are not able to perform a full threat modeling here because there is a multiple types of systems that could be at play here. So now with all these limitations, let's try to apply the 4 questions, the big 4 questions that we talked about, right? And then develop a data flow diagram for this one, right? So this is the first question that we are like, what are we working on? So you see on the left top, you see the high level data flow diagram, and then you see a second level data flow diagram, and finally a state diagram to depict the changes of state information from one process to another process. There is a lot of detailing here. I'm going to keep it brief, and you can always read the working example offline so that you get the idea. So my focus here is to really help you understand how this MITRE attack framework is useful on top of the existing methods. So now in terms of these data flow diagrams, you can see that you can ask a lot of questions about what are we working on. For example, what new pieces of hardware and software have been developed? Initially, we might think there are main hardware components like the scanning ring, the scanning base, and the control station, but there could be more. We don't know. Only after discussing with the team or the technical team, we'll know. And then what communication channels exist to connect the hardware and the software? Again, we may be making a lot of initial assumptions, whether it is through a network card, whether it is through a USB-C port, or whether it is through some other hospital network connections, right? And then there's also another question that what other entities do these pieces of hardware and software need to communicate with? Do they need to communicate with any other things other than EHR and PACS? Right? We don't know. For example, it could be a hospital DNS system, or it could be the hospital DHCP system, right? Or it could be the network of hospitals, like one branch office to another, right? So by listing all these questions, we create a high-level design. So high-level data flow diagram. So in the high-level data flow diagram, you see the Snap platform. Then you have the scanning ring and the scanning base, which communicates with the Snap control system. All these things, the red border line indicates your hospital network. And from the hospital network, the hospital EHR, the electronic health records, and the hospital PACS system could either be in the same network or in a different network, could be in the same building or even in a different building in a different network. That's why they are shown in a different network. right? So now here is where the question of trust boundaries comes into picture and how the data is going to flow between various trust boundaries. Now with this, we'll break down at the lower left bottom at the diagram into little more detail by talking to the Snap platform team and also by talking to the Snap control station software team, right? We understand the Snap platform can have various things like a scanner array, then it can have a scanner switches, parameters and data, power connections, and then various other things, right? Now here, in comparison with the first data flow diagram, we see there are some additional differences or additional things that we've added, right? So these DFDs are very useful as a brainstorming approaches. Now, if you have to really take it to the next level, we also want to understand the data flow, how a clinician initiate the SNAPS platform, and how the scan is performed, how a data is written into various things. As you can see from the picture on the right side, you see that what happens if the power goes down between the machine in scanning state and the scan view state, right? So you can see that that kind of a data flow is captured there. And also if you see in the other things, it can give you a sense of what can go wrong, right? Which is exactly what we are trying to answer in the primary questions. Also, to get this into a little more detail, right, in the next slides, you see that it has been broken down from a ring to the base to the control station to the EHR. This is where we get a even more better picture about how the data is flowing. So as you can see that there are significant gaps in the way the previous pictures were depicting. So here we see there is a initiation of the scan from the control station, then the scan happens, then the data request is given from the base, then the data is replied back, and then aggregated data is sent to control station, and then finally to the, it is encoded or encrypted and send it back to the hospital EHR. Now, what all this means is that in every flow, there is a possibility of a threat, and those are the highlighted ones. When you initiate the scan, are there proper authentication, authorization, and access controls? Can anybody and everybody initiate a scan? If cannot, what are the credentials being used? Is it a single factor or a multiple factor? How can we abuse the process in the control station using a malware so that scans could be initiated on by unauthorized people on unauthorized patients? The variety of scenarios that could be possible here, which is again kind of deliberated little more further in the cross-functional swim lane, and there is multiple things that are highlighted here, especially talking about the three likely areas where things can go wrong, right? So now if you look at these things, right, especially take the case of the communication between the control station to the hospital EHR, right? I'm just taking this one example because it gives you a sense of why this is being analyzed. Now this gives you the actual protocol and the encoding when sending the data to the EHR is not described. They don't have it documented. So this is also further complicated by the usage of the word called encoding. um, we normally know that there should be encryption, not encoding, because encryption and encoding are two different things. And then we don't see any mention of usage of a transport layer security or a TLS channel, which is generally referred as HTTPS. So it could be likely be transmitted in a plain text. If it is plain text transmission, then it is likely that somebody can intercept the traffic and then capture or listen to it. So instead of just saying something encrypted TLS, they could say that it is specifically using, let's say, TLS 1.1, 1.2, or 1.3 protocol with a particular crypto suite, right? Whether they're using elliptic curve cryptography or they're using AES 256 or CBC with SHA, whatever is the crypto that they're using, they need to use. And we already talked about this encryption versus encoding thing. That is also not clear. So only if you do a breakdown of this, we understand a little more detail. Now, if you take this further, as I told you, we have to do the stride analysis. When you do the stride analysis, we see that the various processes and communications we have done has been spread across the various 6 categories: spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privileges. Also on the right side, we have, for example, shown the how it could be applicable if you apply the attack tree model. Now, I don't want to get into full details. You can read in the document, but the message here is we need to focus on the communication paths, the trust boundaries, right? And not on the trust of the component itself. For example, if you're using a scanning software, so now in the threat model, we need to see when the scanning software is sending a data to the scanning mission or back to the EHR, how the trust of the data in that flow is maintained when it crosses boundary A, that is from an insecure network to a secure network or vice versa. That is more important than the trust of the software. I'm not saying trust of the software is not important, but that's secondary. So we need to emphasize on the processes, and then we need to look at the data flow threats as well as the process threats. When you say data flow threats, there could be a disconnect in the communication. Maybe the cable that is available there, or it could be the process threats, like crashing the process that is responsible for triggering the scan. And also we need to focus on performing stride based on elements to identify the gaps. And if you see in this entire thing, there is no information on the exploitation. It only talks about the weakness, that too in 6 different categories. So now how do we apply this attack layer, which is what is the crux of all this thing, right? Now, this is one small POC that we have internally done. There are a lot of POCs available in the internet or in the GitHub projects where you can check, where people have tried to do the mapping from any one particular threat category to the CAPAC, from the CAPAC to the CWE, from the CWE to the NIST 853, the controls category we saw. I've given you here 2 examples. You can go to that MITRE website and then search for, let's say, T110, and then you can see all that. Let's see if you can, if you have a time to quickly see that. So you can go here and then search for, let's say, T. T110. Yeah. So if you go here, you can see the CAPAC ID is 49. And if you go into this CAPAC ID, you will see there is a mapping to the CWE. You see multiple CWEs here. So in the CWE, 521 is one of the likely chances. Now, if you take 521, it will give you the information about the control you need to use. So it may be here or it may be in another page here. And this one. There's another page, or you can go to the NIST page itself and then see what are all the CAPAC or CW mappings. So now you get an idea as to how things are working. So now if you apply this on top of this, instead of just simply referring for each of the 6 categories, you can take an adversarial tactic or specifically the technique and then come all the way to the weakness, which is part of something that you identify in the threat model, and then see what controls are applicable. I also given another example here so that you can get a little more idea about it. Okay, so now just to summarize this, right? So how do we do this? We do the perform threat modeling, map the data flows, identify the boundaries. While you enumerate the stride threats, in each of the column, there is a mnemonic for the threat. And then you enumerate the tactics. So the rows in the stride correspond to the tactics and the columns in the stride correspond to uh, the mnemonic of the particular threat. So for each of these tactics, you can develop a cyber protection and the software. So this is the exact workflow that how things could really work when you are using the existing threat model approach and then overlay on top of it the attack matrix from the MITRE. I know we talked about 2 major questions about what are we going to do about it. So once we find what is that we have analyzed, we have to do some risk analysis. In simple terms, you can keep this memory as 4 T's: treat, transfer, tolerate, and terminate, which also known as eliminate or mitigate, accept, and transfer. When you find a risk or when you find a weakness or a vulnerability, you have to either take one of these 4 actions. And during this process, again, you can use various opportunities available here. Couple of examples are given there that also you can leverage it from either the MITRE or the NIST. And then finally, we do a retrospective about whether we have done a real good job or not, which is a way to document things. So before we wrap up, I also want you to quickly show you this particular link where we don't just stop at threats, but also overlap that with the controls, right? So once again. So let me quickly show you this. So here is a overlap that somebody has already done. A good example, that link I have given. So if you hover onto any particular control or any particular tactic, right, it gives you the control. For example, somebody is trying to, let's take phishing, right? Somebody is trying to do a phishing exercise and it is already mapped. These are the controls you need to implement, right? So that's a very quickest and simplest way to handle this one. So that you see the complete connect between what we studied and finally map it back into the controls you need to select depending on your particular use case. So before we wrap up, there is a need to put all these things into systematic practice. Now we have the various steps in the software development and various activities are performed. In the interest of time, I'm not going into all the details. So now when you do all these practices, which are generally called as secure software development practice, you can integrate uh, your threats that we talked about. For example, we have a lot of data from your national vulnerabilities database, vulnerability scanning. So that will give you vulnerability centric controls. Then you have various activities like penetration testing, uh, external penetration testing or internal penetration testing that gives you attack centric knowledge and attack centric controls. But what we don't have is a threat centric knowledge and threat centric controls, which is what will help us in building the secure and resilient software. So in order to develop that threat-centric controls and knowledge bases, we can use the attack matrix, analyze the various behaviors, just put them through a cycle of reveal, mature, and utilize, depending on the particular application system in your organization, and then do this mapping and feed it back into your knowledge sources so that you don't use them in the raw format, rather you have contextualize them and apply it in your specific needs, right? This way, your technical controls as well as the activities gets enriched based on the this one. So this is the best approach through which we can find a lot of parallels between secure software development at the same time what the issues existing with the cyber attack lifecycle. So with this, we'll wrap up and see there are various opportunities for us to improve this and take these practices to next level, whether to develop a control catalog based on attack metrics, whether to enhance our threat libraries, do some much better security testing, or collaborate with our business leaders to develop organizational synergies between various teams utilizing this various things, and then finally improve the SDL practice. So one comment that I want to let all of you take away from this is how we can really complement the protection and detection, and how existing methods weakness can be supplemented with the modern day emerging techniques. And it is not about using a lot of new tools, but understanding the art. So that's why it has to be very particular about teaching the skills and not necessarily about giving the tools. I have given some links here, and I also tried to paste this out or send it over to Madam for sharing with you all later, so you can read through it and then come back with any questions now or later. I know I'm on time, but if you have questions, I can take for another 10-15 minutes, either here or offline. Thank you all for your patient listening. I hope this connects well with you and gave you some insights. Thanks.
Well, we come to the end of the session here. If there are any questions, participants can unmute themselves and ask or put it in the chat box so that we can send it to the speaker. We can address that later as well. Right. Okay. The Google Forms for the feedback as well as quiz is posted, so the participants can answer there. Right. So we come to the end of the day. So I thank Mr. Lokesh Balu for accepting our invitation and giving an information-packed session on cyber threat modeling. So So he touched upon the potential solutions of threat model and the TVC triad, and he also went on to explain us about the malwares that are possible in a network. So, on behalf of the Department of Electronics and Telecommunication Engineering, I thank Mr. Lokesh Balu. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. I hope this was a useful session to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good. So, participants, we can now leave and join us for the last day at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.